G'day guys, welcome back to Oceania. In the last episode, which I'm sure you'll remember like it was only yesterday, we were working on this old scenic highway that hugs this headland just outside of Dundee, stretching from Rockmantle and connecting up a couple of tiny towns, a lighthouse and a lovely national park. Today, we're going to continue these journeys travelling through the valley towards what will be a small coastal city. There'll be a few networks here. The new multi-lane Matilda Highway cutting through the valley, and then its predecessor, the old and narrow highway, snaking past sleepy towns and old industrial hubs. Less direct, but more scenic these days. But the most exciting part about all of this has got to be the train line. Originally inspired by a couple of little trips you can take just outside of Sydney, travelling either north or south along the coastline. Our train lines in Australia might not be much, but man, they're bloody lovely. However, I ended up discovering this absolute gem in the hills outside of Wellington. This is an old passenger service that was built in the 1880s that's still used today. They just don't build train lines like this anymore. I love this, and this will be a massive source of inspiration when we work on this line. But before we get to any detailing, we gotta first figure out how on earth all of these networks are gonna navigate this terrain. It's pretty hilly around here, and some of these networks don't really like that. The old highway can navigate this stuff pretty well. But the new Flash Highway with all its high-speed vehicles, we need a pretty gradual slopiness. And especially that train line, we're really going to give it enough room to bend and weave around these places. It's going to be a bit of a challenge, a fun challenge. It's good to be back. Like I mentioned, we've got Rockmantle down here, which is the very first or last town outside of Dundee, our capital city. This isn't part of Dundee, this is definitely the first little place outside of it. But in terms of little places, we've got a little bit of extra room for another town that's going to sit up in the hills here. If you've got an idea of what this place will look like and represent, and if it's built around industry or what it might be all about, please let me know. We're going to put in the sprinkles of this place in this episode, but in terms of everything else, let me know. There will be a passenger service that we will connect up. It will be part of the train line, so that'll be in this episode at the very end. But I reckon we'll have to just figure out what this place is all about a little bit later. The first thing I wanted to do was just make a really simple connection from the new Matilda Highway to the old school Matilda Highway. Now this is looking pretty funny with all the new tools that we have with City Skylines 2, but I mean this does the trick. I just want to keep it real simple and just make a pretty easy connection, and I feel like this will do. It was then time to start figuring out the path of the old highway. Now this would be the easier of the networks that we can be dragging out in today's episode, because this old highway is pretty much just taking the route that is the easiest in terms of the terrain, and you can do a lot of winding and a lot of weaving and just really follow a lot of the ridges that are around here. Now I'm being a little bit loosey-goosey because I find it much easier to just drag out the network, and then with the power of the movement mod, you can select all those nodes and just figure out whereabouts this network is going to sit, where those little hilly bits are, where those little lower bits are, and I just find this a much easier way of creating these environments where you do have these roads and networks stretching around there, because you can just figure out where the landscape is going to fit in with this network in mind, rather than the other way around. And these old highways, I always find these kind of interesting because they do follow a very similar path to whatever new highway you're taking. So I'm imagining the trip that I take up the Central Coast when I'm leaving Sydney, and you can see the old Pacific Highway on, kind of just weaving in and out and just being a little bit more snaky around some of these ridges. And I love the way that it kind of follows the path and goes through all these towns, and you can sort of see where the new highway kind of takes that land and takes the same path as it once did, and you can see where the new one is also kind of doing its own thing too. And this is something that you find in a lot of different places. Usually where there is a new highway, a new multi-lane one, there is also just a little snaky boy, just winding in and out, doing its best to navigate the landscape and, try not to cut too much into the land, try not to build too many bridges, just going around these places in a more windy fashion, which I always find really fascinating. Whereas the bigger guys, straight to the point, no time for dilly-dallying. Speaking of which, with a pretty good idea of where the old highway was going to be stretching through, I wanted to work a little bit more on the new Matilda Highway. I was pretty happy with the general path that I was taking originally, but around this area where this beach is, originally I was thinking about putting a town that was going to sit here, but Now I'm kind of a little bit unsure about this. I don't really know if there is enough room for a town or whether or not we should build something completely different. If you have any ideas, please let me know, because I think that we could create some sort of, 12 apostles type of deal, something in terms of the natural environment, or maybe even something in terms of industry, the complete opposite. But we do have room for something, but I'm just not quite sure what that something is at this stage. But I did want just to kind of tone down a little bit of the mountains and hillsides around here, because they were looking a little bit too big in terms of what we needed to be around in this area. And I still feel like a little bit more work needs to be done around this natural environment just to figure out how everything is going to look. But I guess we'll continue to chip away over the next little while. I did want to just continue just a bit more of these networks, just figuring out where some of the old roads are going to go. And I feel like this is a more realistic path. I like the fact that it splits off and kind of goes towards this beach, which could give us another good reason why something might be over there. But with that, everything was looking pretty nice. But that's the roads. What about that train line? For this train line, I wanted it to start at Rockmantle, but be a completely separate network from the network that stretches all the way from Dundee to Rockmantle and around that area. This was not going to have any overhead wires, and it was going to go to a single line, so not a double. There'll have to be a couple of spots where trains can overtake each other, but in terms of everything else, this is going to look a little bit different, and the train vehicles were even going to be a bit different too, but we'll get to that when we get to it. I got to work figuring out how this network was going to interact with everything that's around here, the landscape, the mountains, the valleys, and most importantly, these roads. Now, a quick question to you guys. This old train line, it's definitely been here for longer than this new highway, and I wonder whether or not they would have constructed a bridge for the train line that goes over the top of this highway. Does that make sense? Because I feel like, yeah, it makes sense for a bridge to be going over the top of this older one, but I think in terms of the new one, does that really work? Would they have deconstructed a section of the train line just to build the highway underneath it, or the train line over the top? I don't really know. I'm trying to figure out what would go over the top and what wouldn't. And I also feel like there might be a fun little interaction just to show the difference between the older highway and the new modern one, and the way that the train line interacts with both those places. What do you think about that? Because I am also kind of happy to change it. In terms of that train line though, I was feeling really happy with the way that it was interacting with the landscape, all those little twists and turns and going through some tunnels, taking inspiration from that one that is in Wellington. You know, I love the way that this thing kind of has to weave in and out of this really complex landscape, and it's a pretty similar environment in Oceania, so this is actually a perfect part of inspiration for this build. But at this point in the build, something kind of interesting happened. City Skylines 2 was released. Yeah, that's right. All of this was built before City Skylines 2 about 5 months ago, and then this is me diving back in to play City Skylines 1 for the first time in about 5 months. And yeah, it's a little bright, isn't it? I guess I'm still playing around in my graphic settings. Don't worry, this kind of gets toned down a little bit because I kind of wake up and realize how bright this is. But yeah, this might be a bit interesting. I'm sure I'm going to be a little bit rusty. There might be a bit of a comparison between the first half of this video and now, but we'll just have to see. I want to get back and just work on this train line a little bit more, realizing that it was just far too slopey, far too steep in some of these areas, and I could give a little bit more clearance and maybe a little bit more space to some of these turns. I feel like this part in particular, this was quite steep, and it would be kind of nice just to have a little bit more exposed train line that kind of snakes its way around this little area. So I decided just to use Move It, just to kind of space out some of these turns, and I really like the way that this area in particular turns out, the way it twists and turns around this hillside. I feel like it's just a nice little scenic trip, and I would absolutely love to take a little trip like this around Oceania. Maybe when all this is finished, we'll do a little bit of a train trip. That might be nice. After ironing out a couple little kinks in the network, it was time to actually figure out what this landscape was going to look like. It was looking a little bit average at this stage. I was for sure rusty, but man, felt so good being back just detailing up some of these landscapes, something you just can't really do in City Skylines 2 at this stage. So I was just feeling super pumped, super happy, just back detailing, getting into some landscapes, lovely stuff. Adding in some trees and adding in some details within the cliff face, and then also this little lake that's going to sit below here. It felt like I needed something like this. And with that, the general idea for this valley was complete. But what about the rest of this valley? The larger one. With a good idea of where all the bushlands and where all the valleys and the hills and the mountains and where all this sort of stuff was going to sit, I could then go back and just clear some of those trees that made its way onto some of these roads and onto this train line, which I guess a bit of an oversight, something I probably wouldn't have made the decision of if I was doing this about 5 months ago, but yeah, I guess I am a little bit rusty. But I was pretty happy with this area, felt like everything was looking pretty well thought out, a good idea where maybe some farms gonna sit, some industry, some little bits of pieces of the natural landscape, and you know, some suggestions from you guys. Please let me know what you think, what else we could include around here. But you know what, with all of that work, with all this general idea of how this place is going to turn out, I was starting to feel pretty itchy for some good old City Skylines 1 detailing. You know, stuff you can't do in City Skylines 2. To be honest, when it came to this detailing, this is when I felt really good about coming back to City Skylines 1, because this is just the sort of stuff you can't do in City Skylines 2, and man, it feels so nice just to go in and add in these details, especially these little mountain bushes just underneath all these trees. You know, something that I wouldn't usually do. I wouldn't do this much amount of detail, but I'm gonna just say right now that I don't really care about performance at the moment, and I definitely don't care about just any overkill in terms of props and detail work, because I just sort of feel like, stuff it, you know, like I'm just going to detail up as much as possible and not worry too much about, you know, oh, I better be a bit conservative and don't want to place too many overlapping props and trees and details and all that sort of stuff. But nah, I'm just going to do it, stuff it. I was especially keen to get in and around this train line, adding in this old little fence that's kind of falling down and has little holes in it, and just going through and adding in a whole bunch of these little bushes too, some absolutely excellent Padelmo bushes that are very Australian. I believe they are actually called Australian bush, and they fit in just perfectly for this. But I also just wanted to go in and just add in all those little bits and you know, little shrubs and bits that are kind of poking through the gravel around this train line. Again, I'm going pretty hardcore with the detail work around here because it's just too damn fun, and I really just want to make this place feel really atmospheric. And potentially, if we do a little train ride at some stage, I do want to see all those little details up close. To detail up this mountain pass, I just wanted to add some bushes along this little ridge, and then within the valleys, this is where some of the larger trees are sitting. And I really like the fact that the train line kind of cuts into some of the ridges just a little bit, whereas in some other areas you can see that they've kind of built up on some of this land. And we follow along to our very first bridge and our very first tunnel, and this was an area that I wanted to add a little bit of extra detail, adding in a bit of an older looking little bridge that was going to sit here, and then also just making it so that the actual tunnel entrance was a little bit smaller. And I just found this little viaduct, and it kind of worked well for what this bridge is going to look like. It was a bit rusty and really matches the types of bridges that we have in Australia. So I just ended up copying and pasting it and popping it on either side, and then lowering it down just so it kind of snuck and hit a couple of little bits and pieces. And then for the underpass, the little concrete section, I found this great network that kind of had the same type of rusty color that's on the bridge. So it kind of made me feel like it was a bit of a rust runoff onto the concrete and fits in pretty well. And I just kind of snuck him in there and dragged him up, and it was pretty good to go. Except there was a little bit of just an open voidedness underneath it all, so I just snuck in a couple of trees. You know, good old cover up some imperfections with some trees. And I have to admit, I do feel like there are some extra little props that I should be sprinkling around this train line. You know, maybe some water tanks, or maybe like a little service, little section, or maybe like an old platform or something like that. I just feel like I need something else, maybe even a service road. And I guess that's what this is kind of meant to be, just a little road going up to the tunnel. Maybe they use this to go into the tunnel or something, I don't know. I feel like I do need something else. This is my attempt at just adding in a little bit of extra stuff around here, but I am also kind of missing out on some props. I think some bits and pieces are missing from my collection, but I'll talk a bit more about that a little later. For the other side of the tunnel, I wanted to try something a little bit different. When you do drag out these nodes, when you use, oh god, I've forgotten the name of the mod, but that mod where you control the nodes. Node controller? Yeah, that's what it's called. I wanted to make it so that it wasn't such a big old cliff on top of the actual tunnel. So I tried to just grab a little network of, a little invisible network, and just kind of drag it up and sink it down, and just try to make it so that it kind of fits into the landscape a little bit better. I think what I could add, just to make it a little bit more detailed and fit in a little bit better, is I could add in some dirt decals and just go through and add in some rocks. But again, I feel like I'm missing some assets. I don't have any rocks, so I don't know, that doesn't seem right, does it? I added in a whole boatload of trees because, of course, this is in the bush, and these tunnels are just nestled into some serious bushland. And, you know, just trying to leave some areas kind of bare. That doesn't really happen in Australia. You know, if you're in the forest or in the bush, then you are completely surrounded by absolute foliage, lots of trees. But I feel like in this game, you kind of have to leave some parts open when you just cover the whole area of trees. I don't know, for some reason it looks strange or it doesn't really work, but then you leave a couple of open spaces and then it works. I don't really know why that is, but it is, and I didn't question it. This tunnel was acting pretty annoyingly, and I had to delete a couple of segments and then re-drag it out. And then when I did finally get it to connect, the network itself kind of enlarged when it went into the tunnel, which was a little bit odd, but I did manage to fix it. But yeah, I was having a bit of a hard time with no controller because, once again, stay with me now, I am pretty rusty at this. But with the final addition of a little rusty bridge just going over the highway, I feel like this is a pretty good start for this little valley of winding networks and train lines and bush and mountains. Oh man, it's so lovely. I really like it down here. But I would, of course, like this even more if there was just a little train just making its journey along this train line. Wouldn't that be nice? So I decided to build a train station. It's in the middle of nowhere, it's just randomly in the bush. We'll place down a couple of bits and pieces just to give this a bit more of something, just so it's something here. In terms of the train station, I mean, this is about as bare bones as it gets. This is pretty much just a little shack and a platform, and that's about it. I mean, that pretty much is, you know, Australian trains in a nutshell. I don't expect there to be that many trains actually coming through here, but I did decide to add in a bypass line just in case we're going to get a bit of train traffic. I think there might be a little bit of freight coming in and out of this area, so we probably should do a bit of that. In terms of the train service, I've connected it up to Rockmantle, which I think is a goer. I reckon that's what we do. And then I also connected it up to Matilda Point, which might be a bit of overkill. I mean, we might not need something quite like that, but for now, it's kind of nice. Maybe we'll change it a little later down the track. What do you guys reckon about that? In terms of the actual vehicle, it's just a little 3-car Explorer. I love these. These look just so awesome. And I think that this is a good fit to navigate all these little tight bends. And I think that's probably all we're going to need at this stage. I'm not going to make it any larger, but I do think that this is a nice little addition just to see it rolling around, getting around, connecting people up, connecting them up to, well, what are they connected up to? How's about a pub? Yeah, just a little pub on the corner and a couple of houses. But that's it. That's what we're going to get. That's it for this place. What else do we add around here? just so many possibilities and so much left to do. So much left to do. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. What's going on with City Skylines 1 content? And probably more importantly for anyone who's watching now, I guess if you're still watching this video, you're probably kind of invested in Oceania. What's happening with it? First of all, this episode was actually meant to be a bit longer, but it actually took about a half day just to get this save game up and running. There were lots of problems, which I'm just gonna include a lot of that footage now just so you can kind of see a bit of the troubleshooting, but I'm missing a lot of assets. Well, I was missing a lot of assets. I don't know where they went. I think maybe Skyve did, I don't know, something was going on there and I was missing bits and pieces. And then, I don't know, I guess I was subscribed to some dodgy mods or mods that are now out of date, and there were some weird graphical, there's like a whole bunch of problems, what I'm trying to say. So it took a little while just to get this up and running. And I honestly was kind of going back into Oceania as a bit of a fan service. Like, after playing City Skylines 2, I wasn't that keen to get back into it. Like, I'll always want to build in this, but at this particular time, I wasn't really that keen. I was kind of like, all right, I need to produce something. It's been a while, and this will probably be a good opportunity to get back into Oceania and maybe just record a couple of bits and pieces, just to kind of get some stuff out. But I have to admit, and you can probably tell by the tone of my voice, but I had so much fun being back in City Skylines 1 and back in Oceania. It's bright, it's colorful, it's detailed. I can do so much more stuff. It was actually just such a surprise. Yeah, I'm missing a lot of tools that we have in City Skylines 2 that you just don't have in City Skylines 1. But then the amount of control you have with mods just makes a huge difference. But honestly, I think the biggest difference for me is it's just bright and colorful. Like, it's just a nice looking game, and the scale kind of works for me. I feel like it fits so much more within these areas. And I guess it's probably because I've already built so much of Oceania, but man, it just completely changed my perspective of City Skylines 1 content, and I'm kind of keen to get back into it. I haven't started working on any new Oceania episodes at this stage, and I think when I do release more videos for Oceania, I would actually like to have a couple of ones up my sleeve so I can at least record the commentary after I get some feedback from you guys, and then release them so that they're a little bit more back-to-back. Whereas at the moment, I haven't done any more builds within Oceania. This is kind of it at the moment, just to kind of feel the waters. And it is based on interest, to be honest. I mean, if people are watching this, then I'm more likely to make City Skylines 1 videos. But then if there's not really much of an interest, then it's going to be really hard to justify spending, hours making a video when, people don't watch. I do this for a living, so it's going to be kind of hard to justify that, even if I really want to make these videos. This was a ton of fun, and I'm honestly so keen to get back into this. I do have an update video in the next couple of weeks. Actually, next weekend will be an update video, so keep an eye for that. There'll be more information about City Skylines 1 and I guess the future of my channel. But that is it for this video. Guys, thank you all so much for tuning in. And it is good to be back. I don't know how much more I can say that. I had a ball. So I am really loving the way this is turning out, and I'd be really keen to hear what you guys have to add and any suggestions. Please let me know, because I haven't built anything yet. So this would be a great time to start adding in some ideas. So please hit me up. A big shout out to some of my patrons who make videos like this possible: Franchiser, Wang Chang, Orla, Shane Gibney, Leslie Ritchie, Jay Evans III, Michael D. Grote, Slipknotten, Andrew D, and Niels. Cheers, legends. See you all on the next one.